Welcome to Your College-Bound Kid,
Podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, the mess that is elite college admissions, explained by a former dean. 8 things I wish people understood about my old job. A great article by Jason Engeland from Vox. Mark and Anika will discuss what are the pros and cons of using a home equity loan or a HELOC to help you pay for college. Our question from a listener is, does financial aid work any differently for children born abroad but who have done their secondary schooling in the United States versus other international students? Our interview is part 2 of 2 with Amin Gonzalez, the Vice President and Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid for Wesleyan University on Understanding Wesleyan. And we'll have no college spotlight since Amin will be talking about Understanding Wesleyan.
Good morning, friends. David and I are super jacked and pumped about this article we're going to get into with you a little bit later. In fact, we're so jazzed about it, we're dividing it into 3 sections and making it a part 1, 2, and 3 because it's just too much content to do in one session. But before we get to that, it's another time for one of our Ask the Doctor sessions. And this is something, you know, me as a layman and non-member of a medical team have been wondering, and that is this new Johnson & Johnson drug that looks like it's not drug. Yeah, drug, I guess you would call it, right, Dave? It's
vaccine, yeah.
Vaccine, that's right. Yeah, that looks like it's gonna be approved. And, you know, when I first heard it, I heard 68% of, you know, successful rate or something like that. I thought, oh man, I'm not using that. There's a 95%, a couple of 95s out there. But I kept seeing all these interviews with doctors that were saying this thing's actually really good. So, Dave, who's right, the doctors or me?
Oh, this is a great vaccine. And I actually think this could be a game changer. People are getting misunderstood on the numbers, and the numbers are confusing. The first thing to understand is that the CDC threshold for an effective vaccine is one that has over 50% effectiveness. And most people don't realize that the current flu vaccines we have about a 40 to 50, sometimes a 60% effectiveness in preventing severe disease. So when they say the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is 66% effective, that's talking about preventing all disease. But it's 85% effective in preventing severe disease, and so far it's shown to be 100% effective in preventing deaths. So that's a huge game changer. Plus, there's certain advantages that this Johnson & Johnson vaccine has over both the Pfizer and the Moderna. Number one, it's a single-shot vaccine. So that's huge when you're talking about the logistics of only having people come in one time. It's actually really hard to schedule 2 separate shots 3 to 4 weeks apart. It doubles the manpower, doubles the equipment needed, such as syringes and the logistics of getting people scheduled and to come back. So just the ability to give it, boom, you're done, is huge. The other big advantage of it is it doesn't require what we call super refrigeration. It could be refrigerated just by a normal refrigerator and has a much greater shelf life than either the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. So, Mark, combined with the fact that it's a slightly cheaper formulation, this, I think, is going to become the standard go-to for much of our population. And remember that there is a risk distribution curve in the demographics of COVID. It's far, far more infectious to those over 50, especially those over 60 or 70 when you have comorbid conditions. So I can easily see us bifurcating the use of these vaccines, where we might reserve the 2-shot vaccine for the more high-risk populations, those over 50 or 60. But for your typical college kid who has a very low chance of getting this disease anyways, and if he or she does, the morbidity is so much less, much easier to see this being the standard vaccine that we give to most of the people under 30 or 40, especially to get them back into school. That's high school, colleges, etc. So, no, I think this vaccine is in many ways the game changer.
Man, I need to do more Ask the Doctor sessions, man. You brought your A+ game, dude, right out of the chute. Some good stuff. See, what you don't know is that Dave left minus 31 below weather conditions in Chicago to be chilling in 85 degrees in the Virgin Islands by the beach. So I guess it's good for your brain, too.
Well, it is, but my wife called me yesterday and she says, time to come on home and shovel this snow. So, folks, I got 24 hours at 85 degrees, and then I'm going back to minus 31 Chicago. So, please send me some sympathy notes. This is when I need it.
No, but back to your point, I think this could be fantastic for college kids or high school, anything. Like schools could require it. It's part of registration or... and what a great way to get widespread distribution with, like you said, I think you made it just such a compelling and cogent case. One shot, you're done. That younger population already less prone and just susceptible to fatalities or severe conditions from COVID. This could be fantastic. And you've often said that keeping the other one, which one is it? The Moderna one? That at that
both
temperature?
Pfizer and Moderna, yeah.
They both, that's actually quite problematic. It's not the easiest thing to do.
It's not the easy thing to do. And the most important thing is that when they're giving the doses, we have this in our own hospital. Once you pull those doses to be given in a series of the day, you can't re-refrigerate them. You have to use them that day. So what we've been doing, one of the reasons why my daughter, by the way, was able to get vaccinated, and my wife, was that they're trying to get everybody in the hospital vaccinated. But if they, at the end of the session around 2-3 o'clock, if people don't show up to get vaccinated and they have 10, 15, 20 doses left over, they've got to use those doses. So they're literally calling the doctors, you got any relatives that want to get vaccinated? We got to use these doses. So when my wife went in for her second shot, the administrator was saying, well, we still have a couple doses. We got to use them up. And then she called my daughter and she came in. And so Lauren got her first shot, which is great because in other areas of country, I mean, people are literally standing in line for 24 hours to get shots. So we were very, very lucky. The other thing to note is the variants that are coming out. We're getting a lot of information about the South Africa variant. What we know is that COVID is a mutating virus, and the target protein that we create the antigens has modified slightly. So all vaccines are showing slight decreased effectiveness, but still significant enough to put a real dent in this pandemic. But it turns out that it only takes a little bit of tweaking on all the viruses, Moderna and Pfizer, which is mRNA vaccines, and the Johnson, which I think is adenovirus vector. For those in biochemistry, you'll understand what I'm saying there. It doesn't take much to tweak those vaccines to become just as effective against those new variants. So the take-home point is these vaccines are still very effective against all the variants that are coming out. They'll still make a very significant decrease in both the morbidity and mortality. And as we know more about these variants, it will not be hard for any of these companies to come up with booster shots to cover for whatever strains emerge on this constantly mutating pandemic that we have.
I'm listening to you and thinking, man, you need your own medical podcast, man. You're on a roll.
Oh, no.
Be careful so nobody recruits you away from us.
Well, it's when you take care of all these COVID patients, you just sort of pick up. I just pay attention to what the nurses are telling me. That's how doctors come smart.
There you go. All right. Well, you know what? You're on such a roll that, we're going to let Dave do the admissions tip of the day. We were talking here earlier in the week, and he said something that I thought was pretty profound. I said, Dave, why don't you make that your admissions tip? So, Dave, take it away.
Now, which one? We talked about a couple things. You
Okay.
talking about focusing on your own path?
No, not that one. About the danger of comparison.
Yeah. I want to tell all kids it's so important to find your own path and not compare your path to other people, not compare your scores to other people. Stay off College Confidential. We all are going to have our own unique paths to success. They're going to involve going to different institutions. They're going to involve making different choices, or they're going to involve different opportunities. God has a path for each and every one of us. And it's just wrong, and it's a waste of energy to basically envy another person's path or try and duplicate someone else's path when you have a different skill set of talents. It's interesting. I went to school with Jeff Bezos. I didn't know it in time, but he was in my graduating class. And when I was in medical school, I played basketball with Barack Obama. And my brothers always tease me, one of your classmates became president of the United States and the other became the richest man in the whole world. What happened to you? And they started to label me the chronic underachiever. Tongue in cheek, of course. But the point being is,
go ahead. That's a good point there.
Is that God has blessed me with a wonderful life and is successful in my own terms. And that's the key. You've got to find success on your own terms. And why is this important in the college admission process? Mark and I are going to continue to preach that where you go to school makes no difference whatsoever on your eventual pathway and your success. It's a vehicle, but it makes no difference to you getting to the end of the race, whether you were wearing the Nikes or you were wearing the Air Jordans, or even if you took the Payless specials. If you got a good set of sneakers that kept you comfortable and dry during your run, it's going to get you to where you need to go. Stop focusing on schools or the people that got into your schools and focus on your own pathway, because what people are doing, it's empty energy. It's counterproductive. And the more you can focus on what you need to do and what's best for you and what's the best for your talents, the better off your journey in life will be.
Yeah, and it's hard to understand that at this age for students because the school world is their world. Right. That's everything to them. And so they see a peer getting an acceptance at such and such school. And there are a lot of voices coming at them, telling them that if you get an XYZ school, your life is on a different career trajectory. But it's noise, your character will determine your destiny. And correct. So there's just example after example after example after example to prove that. And David, I believe that in the core of our being, and we're going to continue to preach that from the mountaintop. When editing this episode, I felt Dave and I overstated things when we said where you go to college has zero relevance on your job options. And I believe it's important to capture the nuance. There are law firms that only recruit from certain colleges. There are Wall Street firms that only recruit from certain companies. Ditto for consulting jobs and some other jobs as well. In fact, a senior person at KIPP, where I serve as the director of college counseling, told me that the fact that my boss graduated from Vanderbilt was very appealing to him in the hiring process. So I feel it was not completely candid and honest to say that where you go to college makes zero difference for all jobs. I feel a lot more comfortable saying that it is your people skills, your work ethic, your integrity, your resilience, being good at what you do, and having a positive attitude that will have a much, much, much bigger impact on your career trajectory than an elite degree. There are professions like entrepreneur where it's virtually meaningless. And there are other professions where it can play a pretty big role on who gets an interview. An elite degree will help you get in the door in certain instances. Absolutely. Especially when you first come right out of college. But you have to produce. It's the icing. It isn't the cake. The cake is your character, and the cake matters more than the icing. But for now, you ready for admission vernacular?
Yeah, let's go, man. I've been starving these last couple of weeks. I got to get something right someday.
So this one is going to be a phrase, not a word.
Okay.
Other side of the desk. What does other side of the desk mean?
Boy, I'm just going to take the most obvious. Other side of the desk. That you're looking at things from either the interviewer's point of view or the employee's point of view?
No.
Looking at it from another perspective?
So looking at it from another perspective is right. But but you got you were grasping for straws. That's okay, my friend. Try me on a medical vernacular and I'll be 0 for 5,000. So admissions has two coins. There's two sides to a coin, as we all know. And there's two aspects to admission. They're the people that recruit. We call them admission officers. They do school fairs. They do school visits. They do events at hotels. They also host you on campus. They're trying to draw you in. The other side is what I now do. I started out on that side, both college admissions and boarding school admissions. The other side is sending people to those schools. And so what happens in admissions is one side really helps you prepare you for the other side because you know that world really well. So what very, very frequently happens in admissions is that people flip from one side of the desk to the other. And that's what we call it, going to the other side of the desk. And so it's just an internal term when you go from admissions to placement or placement to admissions. You flip to the other side of the desk. So that's our term.
Come to the dark side, Luke.
You're a sci-fi guy.
That's right.
You're a sci-fi
I am your
guy.
father.
Okay, man. We got a great article today. And
here we are.
Take it away.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
Well, it's called The Mess That Is Elite College Admissions, explained by a former dean, Jason England of Vox. His subtitle is 8 Things I Wish People Understood About My Old Job. And Mark, he has 8 points. We're going to talk about the first 3. And what I'm going to do is talk about 1 point. We'll discuss it and go point by point because I think there's so much gist in each point. So the first thing he says is, number 1, the ways the wealthy game the system are remarkably mundane. And he makes a statement here, and I'm going to quote it. And it's about early decision. And he says, early decision did more favors for wealthy white people than any unofficial affirmative action ever helped students of color or first generation. And that's huge. And so I'm going to throw this out, but briefly what he basically says is universities love early admission, but the students that get in generally aren't as strong. They get in at higher rates, and this totally favors both private high schools and wealthy families who can both afford earlier college campus visits and don't have to compare financial aid packages. So, Mark, let's deep dive into this one.
Yeah, I love this article. This is a former white male admissions dean at an elite private college. And what he says here, that might sound controversial. It's not controversial at all in admission circles. It's just axiomatic. This is just known as a fact. Several things are known as a fact. It's known as a fact that early decision is a tremendous advantage of the admission process. It's known that the early decision pool is much more Caucasian and much more affluent. And it's known, every person does admissions will pretty much say when they get to the regular pool, they'll be like, man, sure is a good thing so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so got in early because they would never stack up against the kids that we're seeing in this pool. Doesn't mean that everybody in the regular admissions pool is just a stupendous applicant, but just the sheer numbers and the fact that something that I shared a few weeks ago, that at some of these more selective schools, they don't really get that many bad applicants.
No.
As I talk to schools, they will consistently tell me 85 to 93% of the applicants are perfectly admissible. They really are. And the pool that's waitlisted and denied is indistinguishable from a statistical standpoint to those that are admitted. So it's just a huge, huge, huge advantage. And first of all, the whole concept of early decision, we talk about the advantages. We've talked about it quite before. We should just say it again because we never know who's listening for a first time. With early admission, you have an early application with an early deadline. You get an early notification. And if you're admitted, you need to go. You're committing to go in advance. So you're giving up your ability to compare financial aid offers. But there's some other things that happen with early decision. You have to be so organized to have planned your whole process out, to be willing to commit to a school in advance, to have an applications that's submitted, to have recommendations that are completed, to have test scores that are completed. And that involves a certain level of planning and organization that often comes from having highly educated parents and also some wealth, because normally that means you've traveled and been able to visit the schools, which is often starting in the freshman, sophomore, or junior year. And so, listen, God bless you if you're in that situation. You know, everybody's going to do everything they can for their kids. We all do that. We all want to give our kids the absolute best advantage, not criticizing anybody at all for playing the game and understanding how the game is played. But we do, as he points out here, don't kid yourself that the real privilege are those who are able to take advantage of this. Anything else you want to say on ED, Dave? There's a lot in here.
It's huge. Well, I look at our own experience, and I mean, I benefited tremendously from having a college resource that now the listeners of this podcast have, but at the time I had you, Mark. And so I had a huge advantage on the game. And the reality is before my conversations with you, I had no idea of how important early decision was, and even of the differential acceptance rates. I know we've mentioned it many times in the past, but can you just highlight in real time some of the differences getting in ED versus regular with some of the schools?
It's very, very common to find more than 3 times a higher acceptance rate, early decision versus regular. And I'm talking about the schools like the Penns and the Columbias and the Dukes and the Northwesterns. And then for some schools, it can be as high as close to 7 times higher. Some schools like Colby. And so we're talking about you might have an acceptance rate 48 in ED and 7 in regular. Now that's an extreme, right. But and it's totally understandable when you understand all the advantages that early decision gives a school. Which I should just mention a couple of them because I never know who's listening for the first time. Because people understand, well, what's the big deal? Well, it's such a huge advantage for a school for them to lock you in and not have to compete for you. Yeah. It's an advantage in multiple ways. One, they can ensure that they please multiple constituencies. You have so many constituencies you have to please when you're in admission. I mean, you have to keep the alumni happy. You have to keep the development office happy. You have to keep the faculty happy. You have to keep every coach happy, not just like the overall athletic team, but down to the position. Same for in the music department. You have multiple departments that oftentimes expect to see a certain number of people in each major. Then you have your racial diversity that has to occur, not just in general, but down to each individual people group. People are watching those numbers. How did the Asian American number compare to the Latino American, to the Black American, the Native American? Then you've got your states. Then you've got your countries. And it just goes on and on and on. And so there's so many people watching you to make sure that you brought in a balanced class, so that you please all those stakeholders and those shareholders in all of those areas. Like I said, in some cases, right down to college majors. And so it's such a crapshoot to do that without locking people in. So it's such a huge advantage for a school if they can lock people in. That's the first thing. Second thing, a lot of these schools, they have yield rates, well, depending on the school, but it's very common to see a yield rate, even for a highly selective school, of 1 in 3, meaning you have to take 3 kids to get 1. And at slightly less prestigious schools, you might even see a yield rate of 1 in 10 or 1 in 8 or 1 in 6. And so think how much work you're saving yourself in admissions if you can take 1 to get 1 versus 6 to get 1, or even 3 to get 1. Furthermore, these schools build their brands by having low acceptance rates. That's what makes people crave them. Can't tell you, Dave, how many times a student says to me, I got in this school and they only accepted 7.3% this year. Oh my goodness, what an honor. Yep. And so how do you build your yield? How do you drive that acceptance rate so low? Hey, University of Chicago has been a master of this. You know, right. You take a lot of kids early and therefore you gobble up so many spaces. And then when the masses and the herds apply, they're applying to such few slots that it gives you this ridiculously low acceptance rate. So it does a lot of things all in one. It pleases multiple stakeholders. It reduces your work because you don't have to accept as many kids. And you're decreasing your acceptance rate and improving your brand and your stature in the marketplace. So for all those reasons, it's highly, highly coveted. So I just want to explain that to people because some people may not understand, well, what's the deal? Like, I don't get it, I don't get why there would be such a differential acceptance rate, ED versus regular. Now, I don't want to apply that it's like a walk in the park just getting into certain schools ED because it's not. We've talked before about the fact that there's 43,000 schools in this country. That's 86,000 valedictorians and salutatorians. And some of the most selective schools are taking under 2,000 kids for those 86,000 valedictorians and salutatorians, not even looking, of course, at international talent or recruited athletes. So I don't want to make it sound like it's just still super easy, but there's definitely a differential in acceptance rate. I really can't stress enough that very strong kids don't get in ED. Every year I see kids with perfect test scores that don't get in some of the 1% of the most selective schools, even with an ED app. So while it is much harder than the regular round, there are stupendous applicants that get deferred every year, even with an ED app, especially when applying to 30 of the most selective colleges in the country. Now, make sure you listen to my recommended resource today because I'm going to tell you one of the reasons that explains why this happens.
Correct. I think one of the things you talked about, I think our categories were like probable, possible, reach categories, and the difference between regular and admissions for the same student can often be the difference between moving up several categories from a reach school to a possible, or if many times you'd say if you applied early decision, none of the top schools are probables, but it would often be from a possible or a strong possible to a total reach, because the differential could be 15, 16% acceptance in the early down to less than 3% in some of these schools in the regular. And that many times for some of these top schools, getting in regular is almost impossible regardless of the strength of the student, just because of the numbers game.
Yeah, and the whole idea of early decision, it's not even that. It's something that's not even known to the average person that's not usually coming from these backgrounds. And if they've heard of it, they don't know the gamesmanship and the strategy involved or the advantage that it confers. And I'll just quickly read what England says in the end of this point, then we can move to the second one. He says, universities benefit from early decision because it guarantees the base of their yield rate. The regular decision process is so much more unpredictable. They like to keep the rate high because selectivity conveys status in popular rankings. All right, Dave, want to move to the second one?
Yes, and I just want to make one, to reemphasize the point that why is early decision so deleterious to kids who are not of a certain class? Because many kids need multiple offers to compare financial aid programs. And early decision locks you in, many times means that you may not get as advantageous a financial aid package because you don't have the choice. Can you just speak a little bit about that part, Mike? So we just reemphasize that?
Yeah, no. I mean, and it actually goes even way back. Let's take a couple of steps back. First of all, most kids not coming from privileged backgrounds don't even know what early decision even is. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing. They don't even know what it is. Secondly, they don't know the advantage that it confers. Thirdly, even if they did know that, they don't know how to put themselves in a position where they would actually feel comfortable with a school, meaning have the resources to visit in a timely manner, have the ability to get all their application completed and done. And remember, for non-wealthy kids, that also means doing the CSS profile, which is a nightmare of a form to complete, and having all that done and submitted early. So there's all the paperwork involved in that. And then there's that fear of committing without knowing for sure what the price tag is. So then here's a quote from England. He says, "I hated early decision. Most students we accepted were not exceptional in the context of the regular pool. They got in at a much higher rate. Early decision applicants have savvy private high school counselors who understand this. These students also tend to come from wealthier families who got a head start on their college search. They could afford campus visits the previous summer. Financial aid isn't an issue for them, so they don't have to wait for offers of assistance. And like you said, Dave, you were privileged to this because, I worked with you and Lauren on the whole middle school process when Lauren was going to look at boarding schools in seventh and eighth grade, and we just never stopped talking about it. So you actually, from seventh grade on, were strategizing and planning. And so I commend you for being willing to acknowledge your privilege, because a lot of times people are in denial of their own privilege. So I respect you highly for that.
Well, it gets worse when we come to the next 2 points.
So let's do it. So let's do it.
And this is a huge one. So number 2, when it comes to elite college admissions, private schools reign supreme. That's a direct quote from this article. And basically what he says that there is no comparison between the advantages that a private school offers compared to a public school. Because when you combine the elite counselors, the access to tutors, the access to essay writers, and schools that are able to expertly manipulate their school profile for the purposes of looking good to prospective elite universities, public schools just simply can't compete to what most elite private schools have to offer. Mark, I'm throwing that out there.
Yeah, I'm going to say a lot of things on this. Obviously, I worked at an elite private school. I was a college counselor there. I did it for 9 years. And the advantages really, they're incalculable. One of the things is counselor calls. Now, I'm not going to go too much into this, but I'm going to say this. The next 6 weeks, that's right, 6 weeks, we're going to have one person on, Julia Esquivel, starting next week. She's a friend of mine, and she's fantastic. One of the best college counselors, in my opinion, you'll find anywhere. But I want you, as you listen to her, for regular listeners, listen to her incredible level of expertise and think of your school counselor and just look at the advantages that people like that have, that are privileged to work with somebody like her. She has a caseload of 40, just 40 compared to 480. The average, that's the average number across the country, by the way. 480 compared to 40. She's been on both sides of the desk. She's done elite college admissions at Haverford College and Emory. So she knows inside out how that works. And everything is set up at these schools. And we talk about counselor calls there, so I don't want to get into counselor calls, but I just took counselor calls for granted when I did this. And it wasn't until I got out of that really environment that I realized, not everybody's doing counselor calls. I realized counselor calls are reserved only for these top schools that are feeders into these schools. So I know some of you are wondering, what are counselor calls? Well, that's a tease, because that's one of the things that Julie and I talk about. We actually did a 2-hour interview because we just talked. So we're going to divide it into 6 parts, 20 minutes a session. It's going to be one of the best interviews we've ever had on our podcast, in my opinion. You're going to love it. But we get into a lot of these things. But one of the things I'll also say about these schools is you get fired if the college list isn't that impressive in a lot of cases. There is so much pressure on the college counselors to deliver and send and matriculate students to elite schools, because that's a lot of what people are paying that money for. They're paying that money looking at the matriculation list. And so it's a lot of pressure on the schools to deliver and to send people there, but the connections are there. And then from a college standpoint, this is where they go all the time. When I was, there were schools that would visit us every single year that would not visit the local public schools in the area. Right away, I would have an ability to set up a lunch or dinner with a place like Brown University every year. And 5-6 kids could be around and have lunch with the Brown admission officer and then talk with him afterward about, the kids. I just use that as an example because that's a school that came every single year. We would get kids on that campus that just wouldn't go to other places. So they travel there because, one, they know that the kids are well prepared at those places because of all the advantages of privilege. They also know that a lot of kids will apply early decision out of that environment, which they highly value. I could name a few elite boarding schools I know. I'm not going to do it, but I could. Where over 90% of the students apply ED because the counselor pretty much tells them, if you want to get in these schools, this is what you need to do. I can also show you public schools where less than 1% of the students apply ED. And there are a lot of them out there. Test scores, which Dave and I are going to talk about later, are going to be high in these environments. So they're moving into places where they're going to see kids with high test scores. And also, a lot of schools, the only reason they're able, this is a little secret. Yeah, I talk about 77 schools in the country that meet full demonstrated need. And those schools will always brag and say, we meet full demonstrated need financially. What a little secret out there, this is something he could have put in the article, he didn't, is the reason why those 77 schools can even be on that list is because they make affluent private schools a huge priority in where they travel. There was one study done, Dave, and I'm going to have to find this because it would make a good conversation for our podcast, but it looked at the socioeconomic level of the high school where college actually travel and when they do their school visits. And you can just see how they're targeting affluent communities with their travel patterns. So what are your thoughts, Dave? Because there's a lot more we can talk about on this.
Well, my thoughts is I'm going to bring my daughter's experience into it. I remember when she got into the lab school in the 9th grade, and she came from a very good school, but not quite on the level of the lab school. And she was highly advanced in math. So the lab school put her on the most rigorous advanced math track, which essentially had her completing Calculus BC in her sophomore year and a university level math course from the University of Chicago in her senior year. And I remember in her second year how incredibly stressful that was for her. And she was taking a really, really tough, it wasn't even a pre-calculus course. It was sort of like an advanced pre-calculus calculus course. And she was struggling and it was very stressful. And I thought that it was too much stress on her. And I wanted to bring her down to the lower math. Remember that, Mark?
Yeah, I sure do.
Would not allow her to do that. They said, no, we have put her in this. They made it very clear that if she was to be considered for some of the elite colleges, that in her junior year, that she had to stay on the most rigorous math course and the most rigorous physics schedule. They're very much into math and sciences. But they also made it clear that they would provide all the resources necessary for her to succeed. So she got extra tutoring. We supplemented her both intellectually and psychologically because it was very tough. And she ended up being very successful and completing a course of rigor that I understand now would have been mandatory in order for her to actually be considered for the schools that she was considered for. And Mark, so often we talk about rigor, and that what kids don't realize is that you really do need to be on the most rigorous path of your high school for a lot of these colleges. And the public schools won't tell you that, but many of the private schools won't just tell you, they'll insist on it. And that if you didn't stick to that path of rigor, that you weren't going to get to that. So that's number one. But number two, that the only way that most kids can accomplish that is with extra tutoring and often extra emotional and sometimes psychological support, which is completely a factor of wealth and privilege. So I know from our own example that had Lauren not been at the school that she eventually went to, the lab school, I don't think she would have ended up where she would have ended up. And that was totally a function of the resources that we were able to give at her disposal. But let me stop there and get your sense, Mark.
No, it's absolutely great. And Dave, I'm going to call an audible today because I think this article is so important. Let's do points 1 and 2 today, 3 and 4 next week, 5 and 6 the next week, and 7 and 8. Let's make it a 4-parter.
Okay.
I mean, it's just that good. And I don't want to just rush to the third point. And we can marinate here. And, each of these points is just worth us doing a deep dive on. And so here's a few quotes from this section of the article. It says a prep school applicant is curated by elite counselors, elite tutors, essay writers. And this is the only time I've heard anyone say this so far, and that we've discussed in 159 episodes. And a manipulated school profile is routine.
Correct.
Even though it inspires less backlash. Then it says private schools create applicants who are difficult for us to reject. Right. The candidate is prepared. The assumption is that private school courses are more rigorous. The student has high SAT scores, which are a reflection of the parent's income and education levels.
Right.
And the school is touted by carefully crafted recommendation letters from their counselors who have many fewer students and far more resources than their public counterparts. I mean, the only other 2-hour interview that I've done on the podcast, besides the one coming up with Julia Esquivel, another friend of mine, Susan Tree, she would write 2 to 3 page letters. You know, now we started hearing over time, you know, from the admission officers, listen, when we first started doing this, they'd spend 30 minutes on a file. That 30 minutes got down to like 8 or 10 toward the end. So I had to change that. But who has that type of time and energy and knowledge of the kid? This is the other thing. In these environments, you know the kids so well. That was an advantage also in boarding because you're living there. You know them so well that the recommendations have such depth and substance to them.
Yeah.
I'll never forget a conversation I had with an elite college when I was doing college counseling. And this was actually about a student of color. And the school said to me, we'd rather take a B+ kid from your school than a valedictorian from the Bronx or Harlem. They said, and I said, why? And they said, first of all, we know your kid can live away from home. Secondly, we know they can live in a predominantly white environment. Thirdly, we know they can live in a predominantly white, wealthy environment. Fourthly, you know your students so well that there's such richness to their recommendations that we know exactly what we're getting. Yep. Fifthly, we know that you have the rigor and we know that your A is a real A, whereas at another school, an A there could be a C somewhere else. So it's just risk reward. And it's just not risky for us. We can take your B+ kid and they can come in here and they can crush it. Where we could go into another environment. They can be the valedictorian, but we don't know if they can live away from home. We don't know if they can handle the rigor. We don't know if these, we don't know what we're getting because the counselors don't know the kids. And so, listen, once again, if you're able to give that to your child, God bless you. Don't feel guilty about that. I mean, you've been blessed and I commend people for investing in their kids. You could put that money in a yacht or something else. So all of us want what absolutely best for our kids. So this is not, we're not here to berate, belittle anybody who has an opportunity to give their child this type of education. But we do want, this is the main theme of this article. All 8 points from this former admission dean, a white male at an elite school. And I mentioned that because he's going to say a lot of things later about race and gender. So I want people to know his race and gender. But this is what if I was to describe this whole article, Dave, it would come down to this. The public thinks that college admissions is a meritocracy, but it's not.
No.
Yeah.
No. It is as much of an aristocracy as growing up in the Middle Ages ever was. and the way I look at it is this. It's a race. And we think that all the kids are equal because we're lining them at the side, each with their own cars. But we don't realize that we're giving some kids Porsches and Ferraris, and the rest of the kids are racing against beat down Chevys. All right? There's only so much you can do.
If it's not a Tesla, man, you always come in with a car illustration on me, man.
I was going to say a Tesla, but I was going to wait until they come out with their Model S Plaid, which can do 0 to 60 in 1.9 seconds. Then we'll put...
You would know that. You would know that. So here's another quote I like in the article. It says, it's talking about the carefully crafted recommendation letters. It says, hyperbolic buzzwords frequently appear in letters like intellectually curious, diligent,
correct,
leader in a community, an even better person than a student, probing, the most exceptional student I've ever had.
Yeah.
And then I'll just share two brief stories about two different private schools that I know of. One's in Tennessee and one's in California. So here's the kind of things that these schools do to give their kids an advantage. At one of the schools, and I won't mention which state, I got to be super generic about this because I don't want anybody to figure, it's talking about that school. But one of these schools, Dave, have two designated recommendation writers.
Yeah.
That will write there's 100 kids in the class, and there's two designated super pro writers that not only are they incredibly skilled with the English language, they've been off to every admission workshop possible so that they know how to craft a letter in the most winsome way. And those are the ones that write. They're like designated writing pros. That's one school. Another school, they do what most people do, which is you can pick your own recommendation writer. But before it gets sent off to the college, it goes to the professional college counselor, who, by the way, has done admissions at 3 elite colleges before. So she knows how it works at, on the other side of the desk. There I am using that at multiple schools. And she reads every word that the high school teachers have said. And if they say something that is not going to represent the student in a favorable way at the school, she sends that letter back to the teachers and tells them to fix it.
Yeah.
Because of, once again, people are paying big money with an expectation that they end up at an elite college. And so these are the type of systems that are put in place. So you just want to be aware of the fact that college admissions is actually not a meritocracy. Why is it that the wealthiest 1% of the country are more represented at 38 campuses than the bottom 60%?
Yep.
Don't believe that the wealthiest 1% are just that much more talented than the bottom 60%. It's because the confluence of all of these factors come together to produce a system that has tremendous bias in it, even that the public thinks it's a meritocracy. And so this whole article is this former dean. And at one point he says, I'm done with it. And he actually says it drove him out the door because of certain hypocrisies. So not trying to be too negative. That's not our point. Not trying to make anybody feel bad. Once again, God bless you for you giving your child all the privileges and resources that you can. Certainly Dave and I have done that. Both of our kids have benefited from private school education our whole lives. So we would be hypocritical to sit here and try to preach at people if that's what you're doing for your child. But we do want to shed light in our podcast on how some things actually work behind the scenes that you might not just pick up in a popular college admissions book,
That's right. And, the reality is when you go to consider these schools and you're talking about dropping anywhere from $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for a day school and maybe another $20,000 on top of that for a boarding school. 20 to 30. Yeah. 30, 40 grand. The schools are straight up front. Mark, it. They put in their brochures. This is the percentage of our kids that got into these schools. And every year, these are the schools they got into and so forth. They realize that part of them getting you to sign the check is this implicit, not quite promise, but assumption that we are going to do everything we can to get your kids into this school. So it's transactional. It's a real quid pro quo there that you're not getting at a public school because you just don't have the same type of numbers involved.
I want to say one thing about that, Dave.
Yeah.
That is not something that the college counseling office likes at all, by the way. Mm-hmm. That's something that the admission office does because the admission office is interacting with those who are not in the school yet, competing with other schools. The admission office wants to show off, look where you can go if you come here. There's oftentimes real resentment from the college counseling office who just wants to help kids. And now you've put so much pressure on them. And I've had many conversations with college counselors. I've done this myself, but also I have lots of friends that are in the profession at these schools, lots. Yeah. And friends and acquaintances. But of the college counseling office pushing back on the admission office and saying, stop flashing your college list to prospective students because they're coming in here to me and saying, I didn't spend all this money for you to give me this college list. That's not how you represented the school to me when I signed on the dotted line. So that fault doesn't go back to the college counseling office, but it's part of the whole apparatus.
Correct. And I know we're coming to the end of this, but I just want to do a little tease. I think, Mark, I do think we need to revisit this at a later time and then tell people, despite these disadvantages, there are ways that you can give your kids the same advantages in public school and private by doing things like making sure you can meet with the counselors and do things to bring the public school counselor information and letter and involvement a little bit closer to the private school, and how you can supplement your own education by listening to these podcasts and investing in tutors. Some of the tutors that you've given me are different ways that you can go out the system to help your kids with essay writing, and how you can you as a parent can supplement your child's public education so that many of the things that the private schools are offering, you can do that as well. This is part of the purpose of this podcast. So this is also not to say that just because this differential exists, you have to live with it. There are ways that you as a parent can give your kid just as much, even though he may not have access to a $80,000 tuition school.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, Dave. It's absolutely the purpose of the podcast to try to help level the playing field. And for those who are already privileged and listen to it, God bless them as well, because I know there's lots of other things they could be doing with their time. And good for them that they care enough about their kid to invest in educating themselves even more. But there can be some advantages if you're the kid in the public school that has all this knowledge, and you are able to apply it and your peers don't. You may remember I shared a couple of weeks ago that when I talked to University of New Hampshire admission officers, and they said that they recalculated GPA, and I said, well, how do you do that with Phillips Exeter, which is arguably the hardest boarding school to get into, and it typically takes kids in the top 1 or 2% of the population. And they said, well, yeah, they're more rigorous over there. Yeah, they have smart kids, but they have more resources. So it balances out. So there are some people out here that take that into consideration. And you're oftentimes judged in the context of your local high school.
Correct.
And so if you have all this knowledge and most of the other people don't, your kid can really stand out. And I'm really glad you said that, Dave, because not only do I like to end on an upbeat note, but it's true. It's true. And I know this because I have parents I interact with on this podcast all the time. Some of them work with me privately, and some of them just email a lot and we correspond. And I was mentioning to one the other day, I said, less than 1% of people know what you know.
Yeah.
And they said, well, I got all that from listening to every episode of the podcast.
Right.
I mean, we have now over 250 hours of information. It's all at yourcollegemykid.com or available through your app. And knowledge truly is power. So don't feel deflated. Don't feel dejected. Don't feel like, wow, I don't have all the resources that some of these people have, and now my kid's at a disadvantage. No, there's actually a way you can actually make this work, because you will be looked at through the context of your high school. And if you're the one with all this knowledge and others don't have it, it really gives your a chance for your child to shine.
That's correct. I want to end on that too, Mark. You've often told me that it's much better to be a superstar in middle of the road or average environment than to be middle of the road in a superstar environment. The fact is getting a B or C in many of these elite colleges is not going to get you in none of these elite prep schools. It's not going to get you into the elite colleges. You still have to hyper perform at those elite prep schools, and you're often with the top 1% in everything. So it's very difficult. But if your kid is in a public school and you can supplement his experience with what we give you on this podcast on how to write a great college essay, how to interact with your counselors so that they will know about your child and give them a great recommendation, how to get your own tutorial resources, how to apply, to construct a great college list that's complete, and to properly place those schools in early decision that you think are appropriate. you can get your child in whatever environment he's in to have the same advantages, in my opinion, as many of these private school kids, but at the same time, not have to compete on the same stressful levels. So you can have the best of both worlds. I agree.
Awesome. All right, my friend. We'll see you next week for number 3 and number 4. We've never done a 4-parter on an article. I remember one time with Anika, we took an important Hechinger article and broke it up into 3 parts. But this one is well worth us spending the next month of February doing a deep dive. So look forward to next week.
Awesome, my friend.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
So, Anika, we're kicking off a new countdown.
Oh, we did finish Twitter. I forgot.
We did. We got to your Barack Obama and my Barack Obama. Number
my
1.
besties. That's right. Yeah.
Yes. And now we're doing a whole brand new one, which is kind of fun. It's taking me down memory lane, how we used to do these all the time. So, so this is the top 10 colleges for where Fortune 500 CEOs got their undergraduate degree.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's top 10, but there are 8 people tied at number 10. So then it's going to end up being an 18-weeker. Take us all the way up to episode 175. But we'll start right here and tied. So these first 8 schools, I'll do one at a time. This is a 2018 study, by the way, from a very reputable organization. I'm not going to tell people what it is because I don't want them cheating and looking it up. But I will say it's a very reputable organization. Tied in the 10th spot. And these 8 schools all have 5 different CEOs that graduated from undergraduate. And this is not in alphabetical order. It's just in the order that the study had it. And I just copy and pasted. I was very lazy. So coming in, tied at the number 10 spot, Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut. Yale University. So that's it. Keep it sweet and simple because we got 18 of them. I don't want to bore our folk.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us the names of the people that grow. I guess you couldn't do that.
No, not all 5. I guess I could. You know what? Maybe I'll do that for like number 1, 2, and 3. What do you think?
Okay. You give us at least 2 or 3. Somebody.
Okay. Okay, so we are in chapter 159 of a book I wrote called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And the title of the chapter in the book, which is also the title of our discussion here, is What are the pros and cons of using a home equity loan or a HELOC to help pay for college? Anika, you read the chapter. What jumped off at you?
Yeah. Can I start off with a question this time?
Sure. Of course you can. You're Anika.
HELOC? I mean, I understand that HELOC. Okay, well, here's clarification. So HELOC is one form of a home equity loan. Is that right?
Okay. No. So that's a great question because I was going to say, can we start by defining these? Mm-hmm. So a loan is like, just like a loan, right? Like you get your mortgage, you get your car loan, student loan, right?
Okay.
Normally home equity loans start at like $10,000. That's usually the lowest, and they can go way up. Think of a HELOC like a line of credit, like a credit card. Mm-hmm. So when you have a credit card, you have a certain amount that you could use in your line of credit. Okay. But if you don't charge anything, then you don't pay anything.
Right.
So that's how a HELOC is. It's a home equity line of credit.
Look at you being all clear. Okay, now I got you.
Now you got it?
Yep.
So it's like a credit line that you can draw from. And I'm actually really glad you started with that because a lot of people don't know that, and it's an important distinction. So if we're going to throw out terms like HELOC, we need to define them.
And this is an acronym. And
correct.
Let's go ahead and
home equity line of credit.
Okay, that's what we thought.
Home equity line of credit as opposed to just home equity loan. Okay. I don't know why they don't call that one hell. Home equity loan, hell. It's hell when you're making the payments, especially if you're broke.
I'm sure many refer to it that way. So we'll go ahead and call it that.
I just haven't heard that yet.
Okay, so we got that out of the way. So, I've got some advantages here and I've got some disadvantages. Yep. So let's just go into advantages. I mean, we've got 1, 2, 3.
So before you say this, Nick, there's something I want to say. So this is actually a really important conversation because this is a scenario that I encounter a lot in my counseling. So I'll have a family I'm working with, and I'm just going to, throw numbers up just as an example here. And let's say they get into a college, and let's say the college costs $50,000, and let's say they get $10,000 in scholarship. So now there's a balance of $40,000, and let's say they have $40,000 in some type of college savings account, like a Coverdale or a 529. And so they don't want to use out the 40 all in 1 year. They ideally want to divide it over 4 years, which is like $10,000 a year. So you take 40 minus 10, that leaves them a balance of 30. And they're like, they only can see a way where they can maybe come up to with 10,000 when they look at the differences between what they make and what the college costs, like just taking the overage from like their salary.
Right.
So now there's like a gap there, and they really want to go to the school either because of the prestige of the school or the quality of the education. They think it's worth it for them to make the sacrifice. So they often come to me and say, we're short. It's costing us 50. We got 10,000 in scholarship down to 40. We got 10,000 a year in savings, 30, and we can maybe come up with 10 just off of our salaries. So what are we going to do to come up with that remaining $20,000? And, one of the first things I'll say is, let's talk about the federal direct student loan. And I'll go over all the reasons why that's my favorite loan. Of course, I'll talk about additional ways to get scholarships, but if they don't end up getting those additional scholarships. And then they'll like the federal direct loan after I go over all the benefits, but then they'll say, but that's only $5,500. We're still short. So then we're stuck in this conversation, about going over all the options. And oftentimes, if they're not able to get more scholarship money, it really comes down to, do they do a Parent Plus, or do they do a home equity line of credit, or a HEL? I'm going to call it HEL because I like that now. It's my new name for it. My new name, or do we go to another college? That ends up being their options. And a lot of times they're pretty hell-bent on going to that college, so they kind of rule out the other college option pretty quickly. So oftentimes it does come down to, do you do a HEL, a HELOC, or a Parent Plus? So I just had to throw that out there.
Well, it's interesting you say you deal with that a lot, because you even quoted in the chapter that it's such a low percentage of people who do the home equity as opposed to doing the Parent Plus. Is there a reason? Was that like back in the day? Has that evolved?
So actually, let me read that. That's a quote right from the book. It's not too long of a quote. It says, of parents who borrow money to pay for college last year, 75% took a Parent Plus loan, 17% tapped into their home equity, 8% borrowed from a private educational loan. That's according to a recent Sallie Mae study. So, so you're wondering, why is there such a difference between 75 versus 17? That's a great question. It's 4-1. One, first of all, if you don't own a home, you can't take out a home equity line of credit, right? You need to own a home and have a minimum of 20% equity in it. So that knocks out a lot of other homeowners that may not have enough equity. But probably the biggest reason, to be really honest with you, is that people don't know about this option. What happens is, oftentimes when colleges package your financial aid award, they'll put the plus loan right in there, making parents cognizant of it. And because it's a Department of Education loan, that it's accessible after completing the FAFSA for most people, unless they have adverse credit history. So that's probably the biggest reason. The average person that I talk to initially, they don't know anything about a home equity line of credit or a home equity loan until you tell them about it.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Which is why we're doing the podcast.
Making sense. Okay,
did you notice I didn't come on yelling 4 at the start of today's podcast? 4 plus 1. I wanted to, but I didn't want people to think I'm crazy.
So happy you did not. It would have been all good.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
Okay, so we're talking about advantages. So the first one being that you're going to get a lower interest rate than you would a plus loan. In addition to that, you don't have this ridiculous origination fee that you have with the plus loan. So that being the first one.
So let me just say one thing about that. That's assuming that you have reasonable credit, because credit score is going to play a role.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And there's probably a third thing I should have talked about. I mentioned it at the top of page 607, Anika.
Uh-huh.
I said a home equity loan, a HELOC, or a cash out refi. That's another one. And I'm going to give a real quick story on this one. So when March got here and the pandemic came, it was weird because, first of all, I didn't know like what was going to happen sort of just initially with, what my financial situation might be like for the next little while, because there was talk in day job KIP, like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Are there going to be any layoffs? And then I had 1 month where my business where I made like probably almost like a third of what I normally make. And I'm like, whoa, the pandemic, people are scared, they don't have money. And then it just ended up being one fluke month. Like every single month's been really good since then. But when that happened, I thought, okay, what if I lose my salary job and my business? Like, people are freaking out because of the pandemic. And so, we have a lot of equity in our home. And the interest rates were so low. So we did a cash out refi and threw a bunch of money just in emergency savings, just kind of as like an insurance thing. So that's another option, a cash out refi. Let me go over a cash out refi. So a cash out refi is just when you refinance, but you ask for a certain amount of cash just to come back right into your account, just like cash. And you just throw it into your emergency. Okay. And because the rate was like 2.something%, I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I just threw the money over there, and I didn't end up needing it, but I just, you just kind of think like you're supposed to have 6 to 9 months worth of emergency savings. And I would have that, but I'd have to top investments, which I didn't really want to do.
Gotcha.
So
cool.
Keep the Roth IRA all alone. Yep.
All right. Well, okay. So we're going to dive into this next one. So the second advantage of this guy is that you only have to borrow only what you need. So you don't have to go doing that like the home equity, like to your point, starting around $10,000 or some lump sum that the institution has decided that you got to take out.
So that's an advantage of a HELOC versus a home equity loan, actually. You compare and contrast those two. Once again, think of that credit card example, right? If I only need to charge $500 on my credit card, then that's all I'm going to charge. Okay. Whereas normally the home equity loan start at a minimum of $10,000. So if you don't need that much, but you just want to need a little bit, who uses HELOCs all the time are realtors, because they it's a straight commission job, and their pay can fluctuate from month to month.
Okay.
And so, like my previous realtor, when I moved from Pennsylvania to here, she always had like $100,000 HELOC at all times, just in case, like, you know what I mean? Just in case you ever had like, tough sledding for a while, that she could tap it.
Yeah. All right. Okie dokie. All right. And then this last one, you might have another one, but this is the last one I have, is that the interest that you pay on the loan is actually tax deductible, which is nice.
So guess what? I'm glad you mentioned that. Not anymore. That changed. My book came out the Kindle version came out in January of 2018. And that changed like probably the month after that changed, which was kind of a bummer, because that used to be one of the really nice advantages, to the HELOC or the home equity line of credit. But basically in 2018 tax year, there was a big change that happened as part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And while it does allow joint filers who take out a home equity loan, they are allowed to deduct up to $750,000 for a qualified loan, or $375,000 if you're a separate filer. However, that money has to be used like for a home purchase or explicitly for your home. It can't be used for like to pay for college. So that is one of the changes. Now that's this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. It basically suspended that deduction from 2018 to 2025. So it's like a 7-year reprieve. So we'll see back if in 2025, if they go back to the way it was before, but we're not in 2025 yet, Anika. That's 4 years away. Feels like light years right now to me.
It'll be here before you know it.
There's one other advantage, which is it can be an advantage. Some HELOCs offer interest-only payments.
Mm-hmm.
So, with interest-only payments, once again, after that interest is over, the monthly payments will increase a lot. But if you're really in a bind and you need to borrow some money at a super low interest rate,
mm-hmm.
the interest-only payment can be, an option there.
Okay. All right.
So, but the biggest advantage by far is a lower interest rate. Like when I did the cash out refi, I got 2.6.
Okay.
So you're not getting anything close to that with the Parent Plus.
All right. You heard it first. All right. So should we take on these disadvantages now?
Yep. Let's do them.
Okay. The first one is pretty obvious, is that you're putting a doggone home at risk. So
correct. If you default,
mm-hmm.
And that's true for the cash out refi, the HELOC, or the home equity.
Mm-hmm.
You default, the lender can repossess you. Whereas, as they say with the other, they can't repossess your education.
Right. And then this next one and the last one that I have is about the government protections that you get. Like when you take the plus loan, you get repayment options, you get deferred at some point in time, or maybe not even just a plus. I guess any federal loan, you don't have those protections when it comes to the HELOC.
Yeah, so you have a lot of protections when it comes to things like deferment, forbearance, income-based repayment and contingent repayment, all things we've talked about in the past, had interviews on, and we talked about this in chapters. So, those are by far the biggest benefits.
All righty. Anything else you want to add?
Well, sometimes home equity loans and HELOCs have prepayment penalties. Sometimes, not most of the time, but occasionally they do. There are no prepayment penalties, on federal loans. So it's just something to think about in terms of, paying in advance. Also, there is something to think about as well, which is when you take out a loan, the proceeds from your home equity loan, they have to be reported on the FAFSA. So that increases your assets and it can reduce your eligibility for need-based financial aid.
Okay.
So there are a few different things to think about. But overall, I'm a show me the money kind of person. I know you're putting your home at risk. I know it's a little bit extra risky, but the interest rates are substantially lower for people that do have good credit and home equity. I like it more than the Parent Plus, but it's a case by case. Some people are like, I'm not putting my home at risk, or I like that flexibility. Right. So you just kind of raise the pros and the cons with people and let them decide.
Okay.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Alrighty, our question from the week is coming from Miss Mary in Connecticut. And I'm going to read Mary's question here. It says, I have a number of friends who are Indian living in the United States. Their children were also born in India, but have done all their schooling in the U.S. Does financial aid work any differently for them versus other international students? Interesting question.
It sure is. First of all, shout out to Glastonbury, Connecticut. That's where Mary's from, Glastonbury, Connecticut. Pretty cool place. So let's talk about this. This is actually a pretty deep question. So do you remember, Anika, when I've said, what are the three main components of financial aid?
Grants, loans, and campus employment?
Exactly. That's it. So those are the three components. Grants, loans, campus employment. So like a lot of questions in financial aid or in admissions, the answer to Mary's question is it depends. Now let's break it down. So first of all, if we're talking about federal student aid, and I'm talking about grants, federal work study or campus employment, and loans, let's talk about it. So one of the requirements for all these federal programs is that you must either be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. You must be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So what am I talking about? Well, for grants, I'm talking about the Pell Grant, which we talked about in episode 118. FSCOG, we talked about that on 119. The Teach Grant, we talked about that on 120. Not going to go over all that now, but if you want to do a deep dive on those and you didn't hear those episodes, you can go back to 118, 119, and 120 to hear about those grants. Federal Work Study, we talked about that on 140. And then the two big loans would be the Federal Direct Student Loan, which we talked about on 124, and the Parent Plus loan, which we talked about on 122 and 123. So those are the federal programs for grants, loans, and campus employment, or it can also be off-campus and nonprofit, by the way. So, let's reread Mary's question in that context, okay? I have a number of friends who are Indian living in the U.S. Their children were born in India, but have done all their schooling in the U.S. So the answer I'm going to say is it doesn't matter if they're born in India and done all their schooling in the U.S. The question is, are they a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen? Because you could be born in India and done all your schooling in the U.S., and you may not be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. Or you could be born in India and done all your schooling in the U.S., and you could be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. Is what I'm saying making sense or confusing so far, Anika?
No, it's all clear.
Okay. So then let's dive a little deeper, because I know someone's thinking, well, what is an eligible non-citizen? What are you talking about? So an eligible non-citizen includes natives of American Samoa or Swains Island. It could be a U.S. permanent resident. Okay. It could be an individual who has an arrival departure record, an I-94, from U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services showing one of the following designations. And obviously the U.S. permanent resident, the green card typically, that's like the most common one, right? There's a lot of non-citizens that are permanent residents. But what are some of these other categories? Refugee, Cuban Haitian entrant, asylum granted, conditional entrant, if they came in before 1980, victims of human trafficking. These are all basically categories where the government has made an exception for you from being, where you don't have to be a U.S. citizen. And then also a parolee. So if you've been paroled in the United States for at least 1 year and you have to provide evidence that you were in the United States, other than for a temporary purpose, and you intend to become a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, those are exceptions. But very, very, very few people fall into those exceptions. So the easiest, like 99% of the time, you're going to either have to be a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. And the most common way you're going to be an eligible non-citizen is going to be if you're a permanent resident and you have your green card. And those are the categories. Okay. Now, what I went over there was federal money. Okay. That was federal money. And so there are some options for you if you are not a non-citizen. If you're not a U.S. citizen and you don't meet any of those non-citizen criteria. One of them is some colleges, not a long list, Anika, but some colleges do give grants and scholarships to international students. They tend to be very wealthy colleges because most schools don't have enough money for the domestic students. Mm-hmm. You've heard us say only 3% of colleges meet full need, right? Right. And so most of the time, look, we're just trying to get money for our domestic students, or we're just trying to get money for our in-state students. But some of the wealthy schools, including schools like Columbia, Skidmore, Amherst, Dartmouth, Williams, Duke, Stanford, Wesleyan, Swarthmore, Haverford, Macalester, Pomona, we talked about them last week. Wellesley, Trinity, Carleton, Rice, Washington and Lee, and University of Miami, Coral Gables. Those are some of the schools that either are loaded in money and they have enough to give to internationals. There are a few I think I didn't say. I don't know if I said MIT or Yale, but they're also on that list. They either have tons and tons of money, so they have enough money for internationals and domestic, or they may not have that much, but they've just said, you know what? We are all about international diversity, like Macalester. That's their big thing. And so they're totally prioritizing international students when it comes to, grants and scholarships. Okay. So I feel like I'm just rambling a million miles a minute. I want to stop, see if you have any questions, and then I do want to add a few more pointers.
No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head. I think we're good.
Okay, so what I was talking about, that list there, that specific list had to do with basically free money that colleges give, like grants and scholarships, that last group. International students are not eligible for federal money from the FAFSA. However, in many instances, it's still worth them completing a FAFSA because there are some schools that will require them to complete a FAFSA to receive money directly either from their school, institutional money, or from the state where the school is located. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want people to think, well, I'm an international student, absolutely no use for me to complete a FAFSA because it's only for U.S. citizens and certain eligible non-citizens. Still actually worth you doing it in many instances. And there are some schools that can require other forms, such as the International Student Financial Aid Application, the ISFAA, or they might have their own school-specific form. Now, if it becomes evident that federal aid is just not going to be an option for you, there's also a lot of international scholarships out here. I'm talking about private outside scholarships. There are hundreds, if not thousands of them for specific majors, hobbies, volunteerism, heritage that you come from, special conditions. So private outside scholarships also an option for you. And while you may not be eligible for federal loans, there are international student loans that are also available, as well as international private loans. So those are just some of the ways that you can help with your cost of college if it is true that you're deemed either not a U.S. citizen or you're a non-eligible non-citizen.
Okay.
Questions, comments, thoughts? Are you more confused or is it clear after that?
No, I think it's clear.
The question is it clear for Mary in Glastonbury?
Right, exactly.
Hopefully it is. She's the one who asked.
Mary, send Mark an email, please, and let him know.
Yes. So let's talk. What are one of the takeaways from this is if you are in this situation that Mary described, born in India, done your schooling in the U.S., it really is in your best interest to try to get permanent residency if you don't have it, or citizenship if possible, because that's going to not only make you eligible for federal money, but most schools still will prioritize citizens or permanent residents over internationals for their own institutional money. So that's something to, that process can take a while. So you kind of want to get on it. This is not the kind of thing you want to start in 12th grade.
Okay.
So Anika.
Yeah.
Are you watching the Super Bowl?
Nah.
You didn't get roped into the Super Bowl by your husband?
Well, he roped him. I mean, he's roping on.
You'll do your thing while he does his thing.
Exactly. So, yes, that's pretty much been consistent with
What about little John? Is he? Yeah, I know. That's always, you've always been your own lady and he's his own man. I know that. What about little John? Is he an athlete type? Will he be right there watching it?
Yep. He'll
Javon?
be there with him. He'll be there with him. Yep.
And will you be hanging out with Janae, or will you be doing your thing by yourself?
No, Naya's doing and living her best life over there on campus. So
I know, but for a while she was doing the whole BFF with her mom thing. Once a week jogs and all kinds of stuff.
She didn't have a choice too much at that time. Nope, she's back over there on her own life. So no, I think it'll be some. Maybe it could be a spa day or something. I don't know.
There you go. Do something special. Everybody else is going to be. It's funny. I'm super into basketball, though not as much. It's weird. After the pandemic, I kind of lost my rhythm, and I'm just sort of getting back into it. And into golf, track and field. Football, I do love it, but I don't have to watch it. Like, I'm not someone who watches a whole lot of games throughout the season. I watch Michigan State for the most part. But this time I'm going to chill and watch it. I blocked my calendar off.
Oh, look at you.
And I'm going to tell you the truth. I know I'm going to make a lot of people mad, but I'm pulling for Kansas City. Sorry.
Well, you won't make the Kansas City people mad.
It's not a Brady dude. Be a politician. You make half the country mad when you say who you're for, but it is what it is.
Is what it is. Well, good luck, y'all.
Thank you. We'll see you next week.
All right. Toodles.
Friends, hopefully you've enjoyed my interview with Amin. Apologize again for the sound issues. It's really my fault. We had to move to Zoom video because there's a blocker at Wesleyan University on the software. And I actually clicked the wrong button. It's not Zoom's fault. I could have produced higher level sound if I would have used individual audio recordings, but I didn't do that. But hopefully you realize the content of the interview exceeds the sound quality. And in our final part, Amin starts by telling us more about Middletown, the town Wesleyan is located in. Amin lets us know what Wesleyan needs to do to improve and become an even better school. I ask Amin, what brought you back to Wesleyan for the third different time in your career? And what does it mean that Wesleyan is need aware and not need blind anymore? What does that mean for applicants? Amin leaves us with one last thought about Wesleyan that is on his mind. And we close by putting Amin on the hot seat. Listen and enjoy our final part with Amin Gonzalez at Wesleyan University.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
What can you tell us about Middletown and just sort of the surrounding area, around Wesleyan?
So Middletown's a space like many college towns that had, in the past, perhaps not enjoyed if not the best reputations, the most access. But Middletown is Middletown, America. I mean, Main Street it's been significantly revitalized. It has great ethnic food, dining from Thai, Caribbean, Japanese, Italian. So it has great food. We're in close proximity. We're in close proximity to New Haven and Hartford. So centrally located, just 2 hours away from New York City and Boston. So, it's a suburban town, 50,000 residents. It doesn't pretend to be a major metropolitan area. It's certainly not isolated or rural. It's a suburban town. The mayor of the town is a young Wesleyan alum, class of 14, who's been very successful. So we have very positive town-gown relationships, and our community is invested in the welfare of the city. And so you see students engage in community service and activism and being open and accessible to members of the Middletown and Middletown community and surrounding areas. So it's a real place, it's comfortable and, it's a home. It's just a really warm, engaged small home.
Good. That's good. And no place is perfect. So what does Wesleyan need to work on, in your opinion, to become an even better school? If you're in charge and you can make any decision to improve the school, what would you recommend?
I would recommend that we continue, and, credit to the leadership, that attracted me and brought a very diverse cabinet and continues to lead with vision and purpose, that we continue to, strive toward being the best version of ourselves and being as accessible as we can be. And I mean that, financially, in terms of keeping our cost of attendance, at a reasonable rate so that we can attract and enroll a population of students that are not going to perpetuate a barbell, that we're reflective and are thinking about who we are, adaptive, community oriented. So, it's the access broadly speaking. I think I'd love for us to have more faculty of color, and have more money for financial aid and things
you
like
and
that.
Everybody else.
Right. In this climate, find the cure, for COVID tomorrow, right? Reopen our doors.
Why don't you had cancer while you're at it?
Exactly.
Got the science program there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you may have already answered this, but, when you come back to a place for a third time, something has to bring you back. What brought you back for the third time? I mean, obviously, you got a really nice gig being the VP and Dean of Admissions, obviously, but I know you enough to know that you're a person of very high level of integrity and you're not going to represent a school that you don't believe in. Just because
I appreciate the kind words.
Title.
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. And to be honest, it had a lot to do with looking at the challenges. The 3 years that I spent away from higher ed, the admission landscape had changed. I came back at a time when, varsity blues, was sort of starting to pick up steam, and questions around access and issues around equity, and all those things, affordability and just all these things. So for me, it was really a combination of factors. There was a sentimental component because it is my alma mater, because it is where I launched not just my intellectual journey, but my professional journey as well. But there was also the professional development piece of leadership in a new space under different circumstances. Of course, I couldn't have anticipated COVID, and I felt like, that wasn't in the fine print in the contract, but I felt well positioned to engage in this space with new colleagues, again, with purpose. And so having done enrollment management at a secondary school level, which is not higher ed, because as you know, my admission career entirely had been need blind. So I knew coming back to my alma mater that is now need aware and not need blind, but is still affordable and still dedicated to access and having students graduate without burdensome debt and things of that sort, that this would pose new challenges that I couldn't be.
Actually, why don't you elaborate on that? I was going to ask you that anyway. I remember when Wesleyan was need blind when you were a student there. And I remember when they went need aware with a bunch of other schools. And I actually respected it because I sort of felt like it was truth in advertising. I think there are quite a few schools out there that claim to be need blind, and reality probably are not. But can you talk about what that means and how that impacts decisions?
Sure. So, to your point, schools have to navigate this space very delicately in terms of the marketing, positioning, and also the practice. I can't speak for them. I will speak for us. And I appreciate your comment, because I do see it as a burden of responsibility, not a burden. I see it as a responsibility and a point of pride to try to be who we say we are, right? Can you withstand the scrutiny of living your values? And so what it means for us to be need aware is that as much as we would like to be need blind, we don't have the financial resources to fully ensure that we can do that. That doesn't mean that we compromise our admission process. We still read and consider candidates on the strength of their profiles and candidacies. We know, however, that there are going to be many more students that we'd love to admit than we can possibly financially support. And so then we have to make, toward the conclusion of our process, some difficult decisions. We have to manage a budget, a financial aid budget, which is still quite generous. $65 million, is provided in financial aid. We're more affordable now than we were when we were need blind. We have students graduating with less debt and providing more access. So the semantics notwithstanding, the reality is that we're better positioned now to deliver some of the charge of what it meant to be a diverse, socioeconomically diverse environment that was responsible in sending alumni into the world, not saddled by debt. But our process is driven first and foremost by establishing the criteria for admission. What does it look like for students to be successful? And then shaping, based on what's available, the final group of students that we're going to admit, accounting for our resources.
That's great.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, this is going to be a much longer recommended resource than normal. I figured, based on the article that Dave and I are discussing over the next 4 weeks, that this is a great time to recommend Daniel Golden's classic book that develops many of the same themes our In the News article is discussing. The book is called The Price of Admissions. It actually originally came out in 2006, but it may be even more relevant today than it was back then. The subtitle of The Price of Admission is How America's Ruling Class Buys Its Way into Elite Colleges and Who Gets Left Outside the Gates. You want to know one reason it is so darn hard to get into an elite school? This book brings the facts to show you how admissions at elite schools resembles an aristocracy more than a meritocracy. The book is written by Daniel Golden, and Daniel Golden is a senior editor for ProPublica. He's the former manager and managing editor of Bloomberg, and he was actually the first Bloomberg writer ever to win a Pulitzer Prize award for his incredible investigative journalism. The book talks about how celebrity kids are treated at Brown. It talks about Harvard's Z-List, which is the secret list of big donors and the special treatment they get in the admission process. It has a similar chapter for the advantage that development admits get at Duke and Notre Dame. It talks about the special treatment that the wealthy get when it comes to sports like fencing, crew, and polo, and how they use these elite sports to not only get into college, but in some cases to get scholarships. It talks about what it calls faculty brats, very average faculty kids who are admitted over students with superior qualifications. I'm just going to keep it real. This book is not for the faint of heart. Golden writes with an edge. I've read the book several times, and every time I read the book, it jars me. If you like tough investigative reporting, if you like a book that takes off the gloves, pulls punches, and names names, then The Price of Admission is a must-read for you. Talks about legacy admissions and all the kids who get in with much lower standard. And there's also a chapter on Asian Americans called Asians Need Not Apply, where it shows the almost impossible standards that some Asians face. The book talks about an actual story. Then, the time it was MIT's Dean of Admissions, Marley Jones, and she's quoted as describing a Korean American student in the book. Get this. This is her description. Yet another textureless math grind. After Varsity Blues came out describing the way privilege is abused in admissions, Daniel Golden issued a brand new revised version, with an updated chapter on Varsity Blues. So I encourage you to get the 2019 version. And like I said, the book names names. It talks about how Al Gore III, despite his frequent run-ins with the law, how he got into Harvard. It talks about Bill Frist and how he gave tens of millions of dollars to Princeton for a new student center to get his son in. Similar stories for Robert Bass at Stanford, and it talks about how Charles Kushner used money to get Jared Kushner into Harvard. Admission officers, at the risk of losing their job, shared academic credentials of some of the students who were admitted to Golden when he was reporting the book to show how woefully inadequate they were compared to the pool that was admitted. And Golden shares those academic credentials in the book. Like all of our recommended resources, the link to buy Price of Admissions is on yourcollegeboundkid.com. On our website, just go to the resources tab and click books. We will now return to the final segment of my interview with Amin Gonzalez.
Anything else about Wesleyan that you haven't shared that you'd like to leave with our listeners, most of whom are parents of 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, but we do have a pretty large group of college counselors that listen, both everything from school-based counselors to independent counselors to CBO counselors. We kind of have the full range. And so they're listening, and anything you feel like, kind of haven't shared, I'd like to leave this last thought.
Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity to visit with you. It's always good to connect and to share about areas of particular passion. I would say that, I really do look forward to the time when we can open our doors and host visitors. And I appreciate the fact that in this virtual space, we're increasing access and ways to engage and to feel that there's more information out there. And so I see this as the start of a conversation. Mark, you and I have had these conversations to different degrees over many years, different times. Yeah. And I think with your listeners, I would simply extend a warm invitation to consider visiting with us in whatever way makes the most sense for them when they're ready, whether that's digitally and remotely or in person. We recognize the limitations of time and resources and other considerations competing for attention. But our hope is to expand our access, to expand our reach and to be appreciated and understood. We're not a place for, my thing, as I said, I came into admission knowing I don't sell cars. I don't work on commission. I have a charge. I want to be of service to people and want to make sure that choices are made with good information. If you know us and know us well and see a potential fit, we're going to encourage that interest. If you don't see that fit based on your experience, that's fine too. There are many great options in the country. But what we don't want is to leave it to people's imagination or preconceived notions and dated impressions or, accounts of days long past that don't represent who we are. So I will leave it with that open invitation to visit with us and engage in whatever ways make the most sense.
Sounds great. Well, no guest gets away without going on our hot seat. We've never had one exception yet. So you mentioned there's all that ethnic food and different types of food there in Middletown. Yeah. What's your favorite ethnic food, Amin?
My wife, if she were listening, would get on me. I'm Puerto Rican, so I love my arroz con habichuelas. But my wife is Kenyan and she's a mean cook, so I can't mess with her biryani either. So, both Kenya, I would say Kenya Rican, as my kids will tell you. We do Kenya Rican.
Hey, that's great. That's great. So listen, if you couldn't be in admissions, you couldn't be in college counseling, or let's just say education, what would be another career that would be of interest to you?
I would have loved to have gone into sports, either communication, something, I was a recruited student athlete. I love data. I love competition engagement. I would have done something probably in the sports realm if I could, or in the nonprofit world, as you know. My heart's in the nonprofit space.
Nice. Favorite place you've ever traveled?
I'm going to have to say a couple of places, Jerusalem and Istanbul, these places that are confluences of culture and religion where, experiences intersect and really just speak to me as a person of faith, but also as a student of history. Those are places that are, phenomenal, just historical significance. And both of them have captivated my heart.
Nice. How does it mean relax?
Like everybody else, I have my Netflix binges from time to time. I try to get some exercise, read a lot, and just spend time with my kids. I have 4 kids. They keep me, going. So I relax with them.
Well, that's an understatement because 2 keep me going. They're 24 and 22 for me, and they keep me going. So you mentioned reading. I've got to ask you, best book you've read in the last few years.
Oh, well, it's always hard to do one. I did think about this in advance. I'll let
you have a couple.
All right, you'll give me a couple. So one, my most recent read was Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, David Epstein, about sort of multifaceted sort of education and experience and how that's beneficial in any endeavor that you pursue. The other, which I read for Wesleyan when I came onto the cabinet, it was assigned to the cabinet before I arrived, called Measure What Matters, how Google, Bono, and the Gates Foundation rocked the world with OKRs. OKRs are objectives and key results, sort of like KPIs. So just measuring what matters in data. And then lastly, it's a shorter book. It's an interesting one. It was given to me by a dear friend who's also a director at Yale, Seth Godin's Linchpin. Are You Indispensable as a subtitle. And I thought about that. It was like, who amongst us is truly indispensable?
Right. I think you've given me some really good books to add to my reading list, just the way you described them there. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
We get our listeners will give us feedback and say, I read that book that guest said it was amazing. We get quite a few emails like that. So thank you for that. And the final question is your best advice for students and your best advice for parents. And you may as well throw college counselors in there while you're at it.
Yeah. So, given to students is, I would say my best advice to them is, know that while this is an important process and decision, it's not the most important one you'll ever have to make. Your self-worth is not tied into the outcomes of this process. I think that's important for them to hear. And I think for parents to echo and share that with their kids, to make sure their kids understand and know that they will be loved and celebrated no matter what outcome. And so my old, I don't know if you've ever had him on here, but the former dean at Yale was a great dean. He wasn't an admission professional before he became dean, but he often said, right, and so I'll credit him, it matters far less where you go and far more what you do where you land. And I always took that to heart. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so that's important for students. Make the most of whatever opportunity you have, leverage your resources, and be fully present. And for counselors, I think the same thing. Know the students and I don't think counselors have to work in this way. I think counselors are in a unique position to be that bridge between student and parent and school, right? And to provide the information and just continue to do the good work. It's hard work. It's meaningful work. It's often unappreciated. But we are grateful, even if we don't show it at the time, parents, that is, so keep doing what you're doing and let us on the college side know how we can be helpful to you all.
Yeah, I get asked to speak sometimes, and I did actually teach very briefly, not, just a class a week. And I tried to end every session, and as I try to do now, if I'm asked to speak on this topic, I try to always say it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there and what you do when you get out of there. And I think it's easy to lose that perspective. So I appreciate that wisdom from the Yale Dean, and I appreciate you reiterating it. This has been fantastic. I really thank you for coming on, talking about both the additional information section about Wesleyan and more importantly, I just appreciated your friendship over the years, and I always look forward to our conversations, and I know we'll be in touch for years to come. But this really means a lot to me, and thank you once again.
It's been my pleasure. Stay well, be safe, and I'll look forward to our next conversation and board meeting.
Yes, most definitely. Yeah, thanks, Amin.
Take good care. Be well. Bye-bye.
Next week in the news, Mark and I are going to continue the scintillating discussion on the mess that is elite college admissions, explained by a former dean. 8 things I wish people understood about my old job. Jason Englund and Vox, we are going to cover points 3 and 4. Mark and Anika are going to discuss, what can you tell me about ROTC scholarships? And our bonus content, we have a tease. Mark talks about something very, very important to colleges that he hasn't talked about enough in the last 159 weeks. Stay tuned. Next week, our interview is going to be part 1 of 6 from Julia Esquivel, the former admission officer and current college counselor from Massachusetts at Milton Academy, on how to work effectively with your school counselor. And our college spotlight is Mark will interview Dr. Lisa Ruff, and she will be talking about her alma mater, the University of Chicago.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.